Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a great privilege to rise on behalf of the citizens and residents of Elgin, St. Thomas, London South. And I say that because citizens and residents are two different things. All of them are important to me as a member of Parliament, but they are different. We have always, as a country, made a distinction between those who are citizens and those who are not. And the reason for this is because citizenship has value. It has intrinsic value. Citizenship is not, for everyone, a right. For some, it is a privilege. Why we are here is because we are discussing Bill C-3, which is the Liberal government's attempt at devaluing Canadian citizenship, at making it easier for people to access, when they do not have, contrary to the way the legislation is framed, a genuinely substantial connection to Canada and to their Canadian identity. We have to understand the idea from which this bill has come. It isn't just a response to an Ontario court ruling, because the government could have, as any government could have, appealed that court ruling. For example, the federal court found that the Liberal government had violated the charter rights of Canadians in invoking the Emergencies Act, and the federal government is fighting tooth and nail that ruling in court. But in this particular court ruling, the government did not mount an appeal. They did not combat it. They have accepted at face value some of the court's arguments, and they've expanded now in C-3 beyond what the court even sought as a way to make Canadian citizenship easier for people to access, make citizenship by descent easier, even for people that do not have a truly substantial connection to Canada. The idea from which this has come from the Liberals is one that I can quote the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He said about Canada, quote, "There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada." That's what he said. No core identity. That there is no meaning to being Canadian. There is no meaning to Canada. He said, quote, "Those qualities are what makes us the first post-national state." Post-national state, a country without a national identity, without a core heritage, without a shared belief about what this country is. Now, we have heard the Minister of Canadian Identity not even able to describe what Canadian identity is. We have heard the current Prime Minister unable to describe what Canadian identity is, except to make it relative to American identity. We are Canadian because we are not American. No, we are Canadians because we do have a shared set of values, which are tremendously important and which we should, as a country, be so proud of. You know, in my maiden speech in this chamber, Madam Speaker, I spoke about Canadians of convenience, people with a newfound patriotism that had these new Canadian flags flying from their houses that still had the creases in them, but had never really before in their lives identified Canadianism with something specific. It isn't just about hockey and maple syrup and beavers. Canadianism, Canadian identity is about liberty. It's about individuality. It's about pluralism. It's about tolerance for different ideas, freedom of speech, democratic freedom. Freedom. These are Canadian ideas. These are Canadian values. So when we try to strip this away from what it means to be a Canadian, we are left with the question of what does it mean to be a Canadian citizen, and a Liberal government that is trying to make only tenuous connections between Canada and Canadian citizenship for people around the world. When we talk about citizenship by descent, we are not talking about the children of Canadian citizens who may be born abroad. We are talking about the children of Canadian citizens born abroad who may have never resided in Canada, worked in Canada, desired to vote in a Canadian election, desire to run for office in Canada, people that have no connection but may have spent at any point in their lives a little bit of time here. 3 years sounds like a lot unless you consider it could be spread over the course of decades. And the Liberals would view that under C-3 as a substantial connection to Canada. Canadian citizenship is not something that should be freely given out to people who were not born here. It should be earned and, more importantly, given to people that genuinely want to build up this country and contribute to this country. Some of the proudest Canadians I've ever met have been people who adopted Canadian citizenship after being born abroad, and they came to Canada because they loved something here. They loved our values, they loved our freedoms, they loved the opportunity. They learned our language, or our languages. They chose to become Canadian and have contributed, and we have members of this chamber who are proud patriotic Canadians that were not born in Canada. So I am not arguing that citizenship should never be available to people. I'm saying that we need to make sure that those who become Canadian citizens truly want to contribute to Canada and be Canadian. We do not want what we have seen in the past, which is Canadians of convenience, when a crisis unfolds somewhere in the world and all of a sudden someone who has no desire to live or contribute in Canada pulls out a Canadian passport and demands the federal government help them. These are people that do not want to be Canadians, but they want, when convenient for them, the benefits of Canadian citizenship. We see the alternative of this happening where birth tourism has been allowed to thrive in Canada. There are companies that for a certain amount of money, they will facilitate coming to Canada to give birth to a child here who will then become a Canadian citizen automatically by birthright, despite having parents who are not at all Canadian citizens or permanent residents, don't even have work permits, maybe here on a visitor visa. Maybe international students, temporary foreign workers, people whose relationship with Canada is temporary. And when we put forward this amendment at committee to ensure that birth tourism would not be permitted as a path to Canadian citizenship, it was rejected by the Liberal government. The Liberal government, who, by the way, had many members, including the Minister of Immigration, say before this House at second reading that they will entertain amendments at committee. The committee worked hard across party lines at amending Bill C-3, at taking a bad bill and trying to mitigate some of the harms and the devaluation of citizenship. The committee, as I said, worked across partisan lines, sent an amended bill back to the House, and the Liberal government, with the NDP, reject those amendments outright. So despite claiming that they are willing to work with all parties, they now expect this House to rubber stamp the original bill that they were planning to ram through regardless. So this is something that is tremendously concerning. If Canadian citizenship is to mean anything at all, we need to be able to ground it in a discussion about Canadian identity and connection to Canada, and ensure that we are having a core set of identity and a core identity and a core set of values that we all know intuitively are part of who we are as a people. And I am so proud to be Canadian. And as I said, Madam Speaker, I have spoken to so many people who have spent generations in this country with their families, and people that have come here for the first time as a child or even as an adult and become Canadian, and every iteration in between. And they are all frustrated by the devaluing of Canadian citizenship that we have seen from this Liberal government. So when Justin Trudeau says that Canada is the first post-national state, that is the core idea anchoring the way the Liberal government is viewing citizenship, the way they are viewing what it means to be Canadian. And this is not a new idea. There is a class of globalist elites, and the Prime Minister has proudly identified with that, who collect passports. The Prime Minister had 3 passports, 3 citizenships, before he ran for the leadership of the Liberals, and potentially now, I don't know for sure what the status of that is. What sort of a commitment do you have to any country when you collect passports like trading cards? But this is what the Liberal government is facilitating. People whose primary affiliation or allegiance is to a different country, they want to make it easier for them to have Canadian citizenship. How does this build up Canada? How does this build up our country? And how does it foster pride and citizenship in this country? I will be voting against Bill C-3. And I will encourage all members of the House to do the same. It is the only way to protect the value of Canadian citizenship. Thank you.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Chief of Government Whip, Deputy Chief Government Whip.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's very sad to hear the comments from the member opposite. In the last Parliament, I spent many hours on a committee that was working on this specific bill. I met families who served Canada who are impacted through this policy that was implemented by Harper. In fact, I think the policy that actually got him to lose his election. Madam Speaker, what does this member have to say to Canadian family who served our country, who are impacted, who are part of the lost Canadians, a system that Harper created, who are very sad to hear his very shameful comments in this House?
The member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
Madam Speaker, this is a gross misrepresentation of what the Conservatives have been trying to do on this bill. There are already tools available to the government to deal with lost Canadians, and the minister has tremendous latitude on this. What we are talking about, Madam Speaker, is not a government that has not been in power for 10 years. We are talking about the value of Canadian citizenship, and people who, despite no real meaningful connection to Canada, will be permitted to access Canadian citizenship if this bill passes.
The honourable
member for Shefford. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. We know that there was the Ontario Superior Court decision that gives us a certain calendar to follow. We are in a time crunch, so what would happen if this bill isn't adopted before the calendar deadline?
The honourable member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't think that we should allow external pressures to force something through that is imperfect. And I will say, je remercie mon collègue pour sa...
I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. I have a lot of respect for Quebecers that have these conversations on the identity, on identity and nationality. Quebecers understand their heritage and have a clear definition, an idea of who they are. What bothers me in the Liberal approach is that they don't believe that there is a Canadian identity. They believe that Canada is a post-national country, which is dangerous. It jeopardizes what it means to be a Canadian citizen.
Honourable member, Scarborough, Woburn.
Yeah, Woburn. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for his intervention today. He talked a lot about Canadian values and what our Canadian identity is. I'm a big supporter of diversity in this country. I'm a big supporter of equality and, of course, building an inclusive society. Does the member agree that those three elements are part of Canadian identity, and is it something he personally supports?
The honourable member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
I love how much of a range of people and backgrounds and beliefs there are from this country. And it's interesting, when the Liberal government talks about the value of diversity, they never promote diversity of thought and diversity of opinion, because that's a form of diversity that they don't particularly go for, Madam Speaker. And I hope the Liberal government will truly back off on its attempt to censor and restrict what Canadians say online.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you. Madam Speaker, I'm wondering if the member can give an indication on whether or not he believes that there is a birthright for individuals that they should be getting their citizenship in certain situations, such as a substantial connection. Does he believe that that would justify issuing on a second generation?
Here. Honourable member for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South.
Well, the question at hand, Madam Speaker, is what constitutes a substantial connection? And again, the Conservatives worked across party lines in committee to beef up this definition, because we do not believe that the one in C3 adequately ensures there is a substantial connection to Canada. I most certainly believe that Canadian citizens should be invested in our country. I think that's absolutely not disputed, certainly by our side.